Hour.
On the podcast, mass market drivers on the moon pound the earth with high velocity paperbacks, but instead of surrendering, humanity asks for more. Plus, we continue the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. This time we talk with Wil McCarthy, author of the great new near-future science fiction novel, Rich Man's Sky. The novel is about an attempt to infiltrate and thwart the plans of four oligarchs who have established control of near-Earth orbit, either because they are successful startups or because they are successful vulture corporations, or both. It's fun stuff, and the space tech is absolutely spot on, well-researched, and exciting. So that's coming up. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. Hey, the March Tim Powers Modern Fantasy ebook sale continues, but it's wrapping up. March discounts on ebooks from the weird and wonderful mind of multiple World Fantasy Award winner Tim Powers. $2 off ebook Forced Perspectives, and $1 off ebooks Alternate Routes, Earthquake Weather, Expiration Date, and his wonderful collected stories Down and Out in Purgatory. Ebook discounts apply at all Baen eBooks distribution outlets. Sale ends March 31st, 2021. When the clocks strike midnight. Hey, I want to welcome Wil McCarthy back to the podcast. Hi, Wil.
Howdy.
Nice to see you. Haven't actually seen you in several years, maybe a decade or two, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, you very kindly put me up in your apartment in New York back in, I guess it was, it must have been 2001. It must have been right after 9/11. And I'm not sure we've seen each other since.
20 years. My hair has gone gray since then. Well, let me tell you, I'll tell you a little bit about Wil. Previously a flight controller for Lockheed Martin Space Launch Systems, and later an engineering manager for Omnitech Robotics, and founder, president, CTO of Raven Brick LLC. Wil now writes from his home in Colorado, and I think you are still heavily involved in making patents work for others, and you hold several patents yourself.
Yeah, I hold 31, and working on another one now, actually.
And these are in things like nanostructured optical materials. And what are you working on? Or can't you say?
The one that I'm working on is not nanostructured optical materials. It has to do with brewing beer. But yeah, I don't want to say too much about it.
Something useful to mankind, far more useful than than anything electronic.
Nanostructured optical material. Yeah. Yes.
Wil is the author of the Queendom of Saul series of science fiction novels, which we've reissued in some great Baen trade paperbacks. It's a wonderful series set in a nano and quantum transformed future solar system. He's the author of Antediluvian, and now at booksellers everywhere is this thing, Rich Man's Sky. This is the 3D version. We get it just out of the 3D printer, I think. Rich Man's Sky by Wil McCarthy. So who are the Four Horsemen? Let's talk about what this is.
Well, the genesis of the book was really very simple. We have high net worth individuals right now actually operating their own space programs. That's not the future, that's right now. If you roll that out into the future, that's really kind of where I started with this. Um, when you have space programs that are run by private individuals, you have good and bad aspects of that. Uh, Individuals, highly driven individuals, are a lot better at getting things done than committees and whole governments, and so that can be a good thing. But also, those people tend to have large egos, and so any mistakes or oversights they make, they're not as good at covering for that kind of thing. And so the Four Horsemen are these four high net worth individuals who uh, basically run the space programs of 30 years from now. Um, and they're four very larger, very big ego, larger than life kind of people, with lots of people working for them. And they've each kind of staked out their own uh, claim on the resources and territories of space. Uh, and They want different things. Some of the things that they want overlap, some of them conflict, and a lot of them conflict with the goals of governments on Earth.
They've gotten so, I mean, they've cornered the market in a way. They're sort of robber barons of a future, perhaps.
Sure, absolutely. And you see, wealth is distributed according to a power law, not a bell curve. So you don't have, limits to how large people's
Yeah, I've
fortunes
noticed
can be.
that. I'm not on that part of the bell curve. Yeah, the power, the upper magnitudes have not reached me yet. So anyway,
Right, right. But we see right now that there are people with resources that so vastly dwindle you know um, the resources of common people are minuscule in comparison, and that trend is going to continue also.
mhm.
It doesn't mean that the rest of us are necessarily going to get poorer, although it might. Um, but certainly the rich are going to get richer faster than the poor are going to get poorer, and that trend, I think, is only going to accelerate over time. And so, yeah, if you're the first one to access the resources of space, you get the first mover advantage. Uh, you get a lot of installed base that's difficult for other people to compete with. Um, and so, if you already have the infrastructure to exploit space resources, it's very difficult for new entries into the space.
Yeah. Well, you've known a lot of, you've been involved with a lot of entrepreneurial activity. Are these? I can assume these characters are sort of based on the kind of people that you sometimes run into in that space.
Yeah, I haven't been involved in the space startup community, but I've been involved in the space program directly, and I've been involved in the startup community. And I'm not going to say very much about who these characters are actually based on, but your suspicions are maybe not far off the mark.
Well, all right. So as the book opens, all four of these guys are in space. Some of them live there, and some of them have come up um, for their own purposes. All right.
That's right, except the one of the horsemen actually is earthbound. That's Sir Lawrence Edgar
The British guy.
Killian, and the British guy, and he runs. He's kind of his thing is the moon, but he's getting too old. Uh, he's getting too old to skydive. He's getting too old to race motorcycles. Uh, all this stuff that he used to do is getting too old to do, and he's worried that he's getting too old to go to space also. But yes, two of the others are in space already, and a third one travels to space kind of semi-permanently in the early part of the book. And the reason for that is simply that they when they're on Earth, whether they like it or not, they're kind of under the thumb of government. no matter where you are on Earth, there's a government that runs police forces and armies and trade barriers and other things that can kind of thwart you. So to the extent that they're able to, they've moved their Earth production facilities into the third world, where there's less governmental thumb on top of them. And they're trying to move as much of it as they can into outer space, where there's no government at all. And by moving themselves into space, they really are to a large extent beyond the reach of earthly law, or so they think.
Hmm. Well, sort of maybe talk about the situation on Earth. We're in a future. The U.S. is still around, but it's engaged in a series of like cartel wars with some. Maybe you explain it, what everything is like on Earth.
Well, where I was going with that, you know, the world seems to be headed out of a peaceful period and into a period of more kind of sustained low-level conflict. And the cartels are maybe just kind of a stand-in for all the petty wars of the past. This is an easy foe to pick on, because these are organizations that have kind of the resources of governments, but they don't have the checks and balances of government. And so organizations like that are it's easy for them to get on the wrong side of government. It's easy for government to go after them because, they don't necessarily have the resources on that level to fight back. But at the same time, they're sort of a smoky enemy. They can, fade out into the jungle when things aren't going their way. So it's the sort of war that can last a long time. And the main character of the book is a woman who's an Air Force pararescueman, who's been fighting these cartel wars, and has been recruited on a secret mission to go to space and intervene on some of the activities that are happening there.
Well, let's talk more about Alice because she's cool. She is. Tell us about. I mean, I've heard and know about the pararescue, kind of the Air Force sort of special forces. Tell us about that, though. That's cool. And Alice is one of them.
Right. Well, the Air Force pararescuemen are really the most elite of the U.S. Special Forces, which means they're probably the most elite special force in the world. And ironically, their job is not to shoot people at all, although I'm sure they sometimes do. They don't get a lot of press, and that's probably good for them, but they're present in nearly all covert operations, because when people get shot up or otherwise injured during a covert operation, it's the Air Force pararescuemen who pull them out. And so they have to have all the capabilities of all the special forces to be able to operate in all the environments where all the special forces go. And they do have to be able to defend themselves, but they're doctors, they're nurses, they're paramedics. So they have this fantastic set of skills. And so it's very logical that if you wanted to recruit somebody to do special operations in space, pararescueman would be a logical choice. And in this particular case, she's infiltrating a space station full of women. So a female pararescueman is, who you want to recruit for that.
Yeah, well, you need. One of the cool things about it, I love the flashback where we see that she has rescued two people in free fall, from parachute tangles and such, while she was herself fall. It kind of reminded me of Keanu Reeves diving out of the plane in Point Break, the way that you described one of those rescues.
Yeah, I mean, training accidents are pretty common, and also during special operations, accidents and fatalities are maybe underreported, but they certainly do happen. And so that kind of, if you're jumping out of airplanes for a living, you'd see that kind of incident happen around you, potentially more than once if you're doing it over an extended period of time. And, one of the things about Alice, the Publishers Weekly review said that she was almost incompetent at this job that she's been recruited to do, but that she has this sort of can-do attitude that she's sticking with it even though she's incompetent. And I think that the Publishers Weekly missed the point entirely. She's not at all incompetent. She's an extremely competent person, but the standard that she's measuring herself against is so high that she doesn't ever feel like she quite measures up.
She's her own harshest judge, but
Right,
she's pretty cool. So this is maybe we better talk about the Four Horsemen a little bit more. Tell us about Iggy Renz, because this is where she's bound.
Right. Well, without tipping my hand too much, I'll say that Iqbal Renz has a public image that's somewhat at odds with what he's actually up to, but that's sort of discovered along the way. Renz is kind of the first of the first and most kind of eccentric in some ways of the horsemen. He's a trillionaire. He's decided to start his own space program, and he's gone straight into asteroid mining. And now he's constructing a giant solar collector at the L1 Lagrange point between the Earth and the Sun. And he's doing this for a couple of different reasons. Number one, it's so he can have access to vast amounts of electrical power. Number two, because this solar collector sits between the Earth and the Sun, it's capable of cutting down the amount of sunlight that's reaching the Earth and therefore fighting global warming. And the shade starts out pretty small, but by the time the story begins, it's the size of Colorado, and the governments of Earth are extremely alarmed because it's continuing to grow at a substantial rate, and it's capable of not only affecting the climate of the Earth as a whole, but of kind of selectively affecting the climates of particular regions. And this is a power that no one in history has ever had before. And the governments of Earth are not amused.
Well, it's sort of a semi-see-through. I picture it as like this giant soft contact lens. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, I mean it's very thin. It's the whole. Although it's the size of Colorado, the whole thing only weighs about as much as an aircraft carrier. So it's a very kind of flimsy structure, but very sophisticated also, because it's not only blocking sunlight, but it's harvesting sunlight and converting it into electricity and then transporting it. So it's got a lot of layers that are doing a lot of different things. And the other thing that's interesting about the ESL-1 Shade Station is that it's crewed mostly by women. And the word on the street is this is because Iqbal Renz is a huge pervert, and these women are his harem. But the truth is a little bit more complicated than that.
Well, tell us what the legend is to start with, because it's kind of interesting, and that's how the characters, so Alice and the other three sort of women that we start with, think that's what they think they might be getting into.
Sure. Well, as the Shade Station is a space colony, it's a growing facility. It's growing sort of haphazardly because it's all on zero gravity, and there are no structural requirements really. So they're just kind of sticking on modules wherever they'll go. But they're producing modules, at a fantastic rate and selling them to the other horsemen. so they have access to a lot of resources. But anyway, it's a space colony, and the idea is that in order to sign up to go there, you have to be female and you have to be willing to get pregnant. There are a few men that work there, but mostly the idea is that it's a space station crewed by women who are willing to become pregnant and live in space for the rest of their lives. And so it doesn't look good on paper. It doesn't look good. He's got this
one guy
sort of
surrounded by a lot of women.
James Bond villain. Right. It looks very sort of Blofeld, James Bond villain kind of thing, at least from a vantage point on Earth looking up. The whole thing seems extremely sketchy. But there's more going on there than meets the eye.
And there's kind of an assumption that who the father that they're going to get pregnant by will be Iggy. That's what they've heard, at least. So.
That's what they've heard, but that's not specified in their contracts.
Right. Yeah. Because it wouldn't be, even if it were true. So Iggy is I can think of a space entrepreneur who he reminds me of greatly.
I'm not commenting on no one person is the inspiration for any one of these four horsemen.
Obviously, perhaps personality type that he reminds me. Let's put it that way. And so, all right. So the fear is that this thing can be opaqued, and even blot out the sun from the Earth if it gets big enough, or used as a weapon in some way.
Yeah, I mean, as a sort of a not so much a weapon as it's an economic weapon. It has the ability to influence the weather. It has the ability to influence the amount of sunlight that's reaching particular regions. Now, the effect is pretty small. You think, oh, it's the size of Colorado, and that's huge. But the L1 Lagrange point is pretty far away, so the amount of sunlight that this thing is able to cut out is a small fraction of 1%. But still, that's enough to have an effect.
So what about the other horsemen, especially our Russian, what's his name, Grigory Orlov. Yeah.
Let me talk about the others first, and I'll talk about Orlov last.
All right.
In a lot of ways, he's my favorite. But you've got Dan Bezeman, who has kind of staked out Mars in the same way that Lawrence Edgar Killian has staked out the moon. Mars is farther away, and so in order to get to Mars, you have to build a spaceship, and you have to figure out who you're taking to Mars. And so there's this whole kind of reality show where people who are trying out for the job are getting donations, and whoever is best at convincing people to give them donations are the people that are on the leaderboard to actually get a seat on the ship. There are 100 people that are going to Mars, and yeah, that's a round number that's been used before, and that's life imitates art, imitating life, imitating art. But the colony itself on Mars is being built robotically. So he's already landing resources on Mars, and he's already got robots, telerobots, and autonomous robots that are building stuff there. So when the people land, there'll already be a community for them there. It's called Olympus because it's on sort of the opposite side of the planet from Mount Olympus. And Mount Olympus is the tallest point on the planet, and this is perhaps not coincidentally the lowest point on the planet. There's a theory that the Tharsis bulge on Mars was formed by a large impact event. And you can see there's a dent on one side of the planet and there's a bulge on the other side. Olympus is a crater at the lowest point of that dent. And the reason for that selection is because that's the most Earth-like environment that you can find on Mars. Now, most Earth-like is still not very Earth-like, but it gets warm enough there to melt the sort of permafrost there. The ground can get muddy on warm days, and you can see clouds in the sky and things like that. So it's a logical place where people would want to go.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you have Lawrence Edgar Killian, who, yeah, he's a knight, and he is a Catholic, and so he's got his own moon base that's harvesting ice from the lunar South Pole. But he's also got a second moon base that he's built, which is a monastery. And so the St. Joseph of Cupertino Monastery is the first monastery in space. And the goal there is much like medieval monasteries. Back in the Middle Ages, when the Roman Empire collapsed and the Romans pulled out, civilization collapsed across vast swaths of Europe, and the monasteries were really the preservers of culture. They preserved knowledge, not just kind of esoteric mathematics and things like that, but agricultural knowledge and anatomical knowledge, all the kinds of things that were known in Roman times that were forgotten in medieval times. They were remembered in the monasteries. And then as the Renaissance rolled around, the monasteries became like universities. They were able to finally transfer that knowledge back to the world. And the St. Joseph of Cupertino Monastery has a similar mission. Their job is to figure out how to live in space forever. The people that are going there are never coming back to Earth. Their job is to figure it out and then teach others. And
our main character there is brother Michael Jablonski, who's got quite a sense of humor. He writes to his boss and at least platonic paramour, maybe he's joking, I don't know, but he's funny, and that is sort of in a way it's comic relief in the novel, but it's also you get a lot of info drop in there, cool moon stuff that you work in. He's, for instance, trying to figure out what will grow in lunar soil, right?
Right. And there is some good evidence here on Earth that there are a few things that will grow in unmodified lunar soil. It's tricky. That soil is very impoverished in a lot of nutrients. So plants that are, but yeah, that's an example of what the monks there are doing, is trying to figure out what will grow and how to grow it, and to not only that, but to kind of develop their own strains of plants that are specialized for growing in lunar soil.
I really liked the letter that's a day in the life of the monastery, which really gets a lot of cool details in of what living on the moon would require, and the kind of shielding that they have, and what they do during the day, and the kind of clothing they wear, and the fact that washing is a big deal.
Right.
Hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, a detail that we don't think about very much here on Earth. We've got dust and dirt and sand all over the place, and we don't really think about it. But that's because it's been worn down by wind and rain and time. So it's not a dangerous material. But on the moon, the dust consists of tiny little arrowheads, microscopic arrowheads that haven't been worn down by anything. And so the dust is carcinogenic. It's toxic. It will make your nose run and your eyes water, and it'll give you a cough. It acts like asbestos in the body. It's very inflammatory. And so dealing with that dust, especially if you're going outside, if you're going in and out all the time, dealing with that dust is a major fact of life. They don't let it stop them. They're not saying, oh, because it's a carcinogen, we can't live here. they are living there, but they have to deal with it. They have to constantly do things to minimize that risk. Same with the radiation. They have a lot of things that they kind of have to do all the time to minimize that risk. But they're the guinea pigs. Their job is to figure all that out so that other people don't have to.
Experiment.
Yeah. Right.
So tell us about the Fourth Horseman. Have we covered the first three, right?
Yeah.
You got Baseman.
Yeah. So Grigory Orlov is he's ethnically Russian, and he comes from an oil family, and the Russian oil business is a very sort of literally cutthroat business. It's run by what we would consider here in the West to be organized crime. So his father was an oil baron, and he grew up. He was an oil baron who became a deuterium baron, and Grigory is trying to become also a tritium baron. But unlike the other horsemen, he's not really coming from a place of optimism and open spirit. He's really coming from a place of conquest. And so he has set up his own asteroid mining facilities, and he set up a depot at the L2 Lagrange point. No, sorry, the L1 Lagrange point between the Earth and the Moon. And he's manufacturing fuel and selling fuel and critical gases like nitrogen, and selling them to other facilities in space. So, for example, the Moon is almost completely dependent. The Moon has its own source of water. So they've got, hydrogen and oxygen, and they've got all the minerals of the Moon, but they have almost no access to carbon, and they have almost no access to nitrogen. So these things are extremely valuable on the Moon, and Orlov Petrochemicals supplies those. And they supply fuel for the Mars ship that Dan Bezeman is building, and they supply materials to ESL-1 Shade Station also. But it's very sort of monopolistic. They charge high prices that are sort of onerous to other people. And early in the book, as the governments of Earth begin to tighten their grip, they don't like what's going on here, and so there's an embargo and a naval blockade that keeps the materials. For example, rockets are built in Africa, but they're launched in South America. Naval blockade prevents the rockets that have already been built from being sent to South America, and so a lot of the space resources of the Horsemen are soon to be grounded, and this is something of great concern to everyone. But Orlov, instead of seeing this as a problem, sees it as an advantage, and he uses this as leverage to influence the fortunes of the other horsemen. And so you see this kind of gleefully predatory action on his part. And I like him because he's unrepentant. He's a fun character to write because he does bad things, not like really bad. He's not a mass murderer. He's not a rapist or anything like that, but he likes to win, and he specifically likes for other people to lose. And he doesn't wring his hands at the unfairness of it all.
Well,
so
I mean, he sees
got
himself
a
as a hero of sorts, and that in his own mind, in that if he doesn't do it, somebody else will, and when he sees an opportunity, he feels bad if he doesn't grasp it and go for it. Like cornering a product and making people pay through the nose. He would go to sleep sad if he hadn't done that, right? I mean, it would
Yeah,
be a
yeah,
lost
and
opportunity.
you know, right, and the whole reason he's in space, he'll even admit during a couple of points in the story that his resources in space do not provide a large amount of his cash flow. Most of his cash flow comes from Earth, from earthly resources, from oil and deuterium and other things that are available on Earth. They're produced on Earth, they're sold on Earth. That's where most of his money comes from. But he's in space because that's the future. And he doesn't want to let someone else control the future. He wants to control the future. Um, so yeah, that's why he's there, and that's why when he realizes that the naval blockade is about to ground his ships, he heads to space right away because he doesn't want to be kept away from his future in that way. But he's also a guy with a strong chin. He's a guy who spends a lot of time in the gym, uh, you know, or punching a, a punching bag, things
Yeah,
like that.
or his
He's
subordinates.
you know
Yeah.
a Russian hero,
Yeah.
or his subordinates. Yes.
So this I so some of the governments on Earth are sending up a mission. And this is the beginning of the book, so we're not really giving anything, and it's also in the description on the jacket. So they're sending up they've infiltrated the women that are going up, and they put, for instance, Alice, and there's a couple of others that we meet. Donna Obata, who's a very interesting character. Can you tell us a little? We've talked about Alice. Let's talk about Donna, who's kind of the yang to Donna's yin, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Alice is, an Air Force medic who's been recruited to do this kind of clandestine mission. Donna Obata is a professional operative. Um, she's, like Alice, she's in her late 20s, but she's been groomed since her late teens to be this sort of uh, very dangerous, very charming, very fluid person who speaks a lot of languages and can operate a lot of weapons and things like that. And she's very skilled at hand-to-hand combat and you know things like that. So when Alice looks at Donna, she feels, well, again, she sets a very high bar for herself. She looks at Donna and sees somebody who's a real professional, whereas Alice, is an amateur. Um,
Well, she's a professional
and then,
sociopath, that's for sure. She's very good at looking out for
yeah,
Donna.
she is not a nice person, but I hope this doesn't give too much away. She and Grigory Orlov have some common interests and find that their interests are aligned.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another that's a pairing that I think is fun to write about, and I hope fun to read about.
Yeah, we should talk a little bit about the prose. There's a lot of fun hijinks. There's a arch tone, perhaps, to some of the storytelling that's fun. It's not all grim going forward in the vacuum of space. In any moment, you might. I mean, and I think it stems from the sort of entrepreneurial, hopeful nature of the whole thing. Even though these guys are trying to, they're way too rich for their own good, and bad things are happening in places and difficulties arise. It's still fun because we're in space.
Yeah, that's true. And even the people that are sent to at least nominally put a stop to it, they're not entirely immune to that either. To the the excitement of space, and you know, uh, these horsemen have something to offer that the earth does not, which is this kind of open-ended, expansive, can-do, you know, it really is a frontier. It's a very lively frontier, that has a lot of energy, literally has a lot of energy, and a lot of resources and not a lot of oversight. And, you know, that's a temptation. Even if you're sent there to put a stop to that, there is a temptation.
To have fun, no matter in the moment, yeah. To revel, and perhaps to get it on with a starship, with a spaceship captain or two, or others.
Yeah,
So,
the cover, you know, clearly emphasizes the. I think that's a great cover, by the way. Dave Seeley did a fantastic job. You mentioned the fun aspect, and I think it is fun, and I think it's sexy. I think there's a kind of a tone of eroticism that runs through a lot of the story, but it's also creepy. When people have a lot of power over you personally, that's very creepy. And I think that cover perfectly captures the fun, expansive, sexy creepiness of the whole kind of scenario.
yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of, you have to think about what you're wearing, and there's a lot of reason not to wear much. So, you do
Yeah,
go
well,
into,
and
we have space underwear that's printed.
right, the 3D printed space underwear, it's very practical, because doing laundry in space turns out is extremely difficult. It consumes a lot of water, it consumes a lot of power, and those things, and it takes space, and it takes human labor, and all these things are in short supply. So what you really need out of space underwear is something that can go a long time between washings, something that doesn't absorb odors, that provides a good barrier so that the sensitive parts of your body don't rub on spacesuits or jumpsuits or what have you. So, you know, you have this need for this very particular kind of underwear. But you know, Dave Seeley just went ahead and also made it sexy. So
Yeah,
okay.
why not? So, well, there are portions of the book we want to talk about, but it's really cool because Iggy is up to something that's either amazing or incredibly foolhardy, and there's a lot of revelation throughout the book about what that may be as Alice gets closer to the truth, and also deals with some traitors and other bad things. It's really cool. Little narrative that neatly ties itself up at the end with what's going on. Maybe the one other thing that Iggy does DMT and some other drug concoctions, and I take it that a lot of people in Silicon Valley are experimenting with this crap, even as we speak, and trying to you know, in a 60s, almost 60s fashion, but very techy, raise their consciousness and open up to the you know, the space aliens through the ionosphere or whatever the hell.
Yeah, ayahuasca is very huge in Silicon Valley right now, and ayahuasca contains DMT. But when you talk about
Ayahuasca is a
DMT,
vine from South America that's brewed into it. Yeah.
right, right. But one of the things when I was sort of dreaming up Iqbal Renz as a character, I was thinking about this kind of link between techie people and DMT. And there's a peculiar property of DMT that people who take it report a state of consciousness, a state of being that doesn't translate into language very well. But there are people there. There are beings of some sort there that
Don't they say
are
a lot of
happy to
little
see
people
you.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I've heard, that there's often a
Yeah, they
report
get
of.
described as right, right. They're elves, they're spirits, they're ghosts, they're angels, they're demons. Um, People report them differently, but there's this very strong sense that during a DMT high, you go to a different place and there's someone there. Um, and I just thought, what if that were true? Uh, or even if it weren't true, what if somebody with a lot of resources believed it was true? Uh, and so that was kind of part of the inspiration of Iqbal. But it's also part of what makes him so frightening to the governments of Earth. You have this guy with his own space station and his own solar shade and his crew of sexy women, and he's a drug addict. It just doesn't look good.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways it could go sideways, I guess. So, what are you working on at the moment?
Uh, I'm working on a sequel to Rich Man's Sky. It's called Poor Man's Sky, and it deals with sort of the flip side of some of the same situations. In Rich Man's Sky, you have these four horsemen that are kind of calling the shots, and you have governments that are trying to assert their own dominance. And in Poor Man's Sky, it's a little bit more personal. You have labor disputes, and you have the people that are competing for this Mars colony. And if you think about that, if people are competing to participate in the biggest adventure that the human race has ever seen, if you're competing for a slot on that spaceship and there's somebody in front of you in that competition, if you're one spot away, the way it works, you have to compete for a particular job. So even janitor, if you want to be the janitor on Mars, you have to compete for it. And the guy who is in the lead to be the janitor is a billionaire. He's selling his company to raise the money to sponsor himself for this job of janitor, because janitor on Mars is better than billionaire on Earth. I think the people that are in second place, the people that are in third or fourth place, that's the sort of thing that people get killed over. That's the sort of thing that murders get committed over. And that's how Poor Man's Sky starts, is with somebody dying, with a candidate for Olympus dying under mysterious circumstances on the moon. In fact, at St. Joseph of Cupertino Monastery. And so that's kind of the jumping off point for this a little bit darker exploration of what it's like when you're not the trillionaire.
Yeah. Well, I hope we see more of Brother Yablonsky, because he's fun. And I hope he shows.
Well, I'll say that the personality that he has when he's writing and the personality that he has in person are not quite the same. And how could they be? And you see this a lot. There are people that I know who write very flamboyantly, and when you meet them, they're just some guy or girl. And Brother Michael is a bit like that. When you meet him, he seems a little ordinary, but you get the sense that there's something a little bit magical about him.
He's got a rich inner life that perhaps doesn't, that shows every once in a while. Well, out now at booksellers is Rich Man's Sky by Wil McCarthy, with the cool cover and the nice foiling as well, space-like foiling on the front. So, Wil, thank you so much for talking with us about Rich Man's Sky.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization, but the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
Harrington House, City of Landing. Planet of Manticore. Manticore binary system. Well, I guess that's everything. Honor Alexander Harrington stood in the quiet library. Rain pounded the skylight overhead. It was barely mid-afternoon, but the overcast day was dark and murky, and somehow it felt cold, despite Landing's warmth. She listened to the rain as she looked around her at all the familiar furnishings, the shelved books, the paintings, the subdued lighting. But she didn't really see any of it, and she looked like a stranger standing in someone else's house, unable to understand how she'd come there. "If you're sure," her mother said. Allison stood beside Honor with Catherine in her arms. Raoul was in the nursery. He burst into sobs any time Honor was in the same room as him, clinging to her with desperate strength. She didn't know exactly how it worked, but there was no question that he was able to taste her emotions, whether or not he could truly feel anyone else's. She needed to cling to him as desperately as he needed to cling to her, but she couldn't. She couldn't inflict that on him, not now. Not when he was only a baby and no one could possibly explain it to him. And so she'd handed him as gently as she could to Lindsay Phillips and walked out of that nursery, heartbreaking at his sobbed, "Mama! Mama!" from behind her. Now he lay exhausted in his crib, and the Whitehaven tree cats huddled around him like guardian gargoyles, somehow blunting the worst of his sorrow and fear. Catherine was subdued, obviously aware something dreadful had happened, yet at least she'd been spared the terrible weight of someone else's grief, and Honor reached out to lay a gentle hand on the little girl's head. For a moment, something seemed alive behind the frozen flint of her eyes, but then she took her hand from Catherine's head, and whatever it had been disappeared once again into the ice. "I have to get back to the ship. We've got a lot to do, and I don't want to lose the time window." "If you're sure," Allison repeated with a very different emphasis, and Honor looked at her. Honor had raised every barrier she could against the emotions of those about her. Her ability to feel what others felt wasn't something she could turn off or on. It simply was, an inescapable part of who she'd become over the years. She had learned to adjust the volume, though, and she needed that now. Needed it because the loss and the pain, the fury and the sympathy pouring into her and Nimitz from everyone around them threatened to drag them under. That tide of emotion threatened to break her concentration, threatened to divert her from the task before her, and nothing could be permitted to do that. But her mother's very special anguish could not be escaped. The grief over the death of her beloved twin brother, the knowledge of how Jacques' death, especially like this, would hammer all of Alfred Harrington's wounds from the Iwata strike, the aching sense of loss for a son-in-law and especially a daughter-in-law she'd come to love dearly. The knowledge that dozens of other friends, family, must have died aboard the Beowulf habitats with Jacques and Hamish. And fear for her daughter. "I'm sure, Mother." There was no emotion in Honor's voice, but she managed a brief caricature of a smile. It vanished quickly, and her nostrils flared as she reached up to the silent, grieving tree cat on her shoulder. "Like I told Elizabeth, this has to end, and I'm going to end it once and for all." Allison shifted Catherine's weight so she could lay one hand on Honor's arm. "I know you are, sweetheart." Her voice was calm, almost serene, despite the tears glittering on her lashes, and she shook her head. "I know that, believe me. But you come back to me. Raoul and Catherine need you now more than ever, and your father and I..." We'll always need you, Honor. So you come back to us. Mother, I'll be aboard the fleet flagship. She managed another fleeting smile. The Sollies don't have a thing that could touch her in a stand-up fight. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we just didn't make that clear enough. A very different expression replaced the smile, and her frozen eyes filled with a chill, flickering fire. That's one of the oversights I intend to set right. She felt Allison's concern spike higher, but she refused to allow it in, denied it access to the frozen helium of her purpose. She knew what Allison really meant, knew what her mother really wanted to say was, "Give me back my daughter and take away this stranger. Give me back the person who still knows how to love, how to care. Give me back my child, and give back the mother my grandchildren need." But Honor didn't know if she could do that. She didn't know if anyone could do that. She reached out, touched her mother's cheek very gently, and her thumb brushed away one of Allison's tears. "Take care of Daddy and the babies," she said softly. "Of course I will." "I know." She leaned close, kissed Catherine's cheek, then leaned her forehead against her mother's for a long, still moment. And then Honor Alexander Harrington, Duchess and Stedholder Harrington, turned and walked out of that foyer, into the driving landing rain, down the steps to the waiting air car, without a backward glance.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz, and the end parts and tasty bits of a very excited alligator that swallowed a python, that swallowed a goat, that swallowed a truck, that swallowed a hijacked shipment of nuclear missile guidance systems, that swallowed a couple of 5-year-old iPhones for reasons unknown. Plus thanks, praise, and gratitude to Wil McCarthy, author of Rich Man's Sky. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.